But we, as a matter of fact, did finally. I walked off the set, and I went home in a state of righteous indignation.
Gregory Peck was one of Hollywood's most admired leading men, known for his calm dignity, commanding presence, and unforgettable roles in classics like To Kill a Mockingbird. Yet behind the camera, Peck wasn't always the quiet gentleman. People thought he was. There was one actor in particular he vehemently disliked, and for years the truth was hidden behind closed studio doors. Now, after decades of whispers, we finally know why Gregory Peck harbored such intense feelings. And the answer might just shock you. To audiences around the world, Gregory Peck was the very definition of dignity. With his tall frame, deep voice, and commanding presence, he became one of Hollywood's most respected leading men from the 1940s through the 1960s. His roles often reflected moral strength and integrity, most famously as Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, a performance that earned him an Academy Award and cemented his place in cinema history. To fans, Peck was the embodiment of grace and quiet power. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, Peck was also a man of strong convictions, sometimes so strong that they led him into serious conflict. Peck's rise to fame was meteoric. Born in 1916, he endured a difficult childhood shaped by his parents, divorce, and long periods of loneliness. These early struggles seemed to instill in him a kind of seriousness that never quite left his personality. When he entered Hollywood in the 1940s, he immediately stood out, not only for his striking looks, but for his ability to carry weighty, dramatic roles. In films like Gentleman's Agreement, 1947, which tackled the issue of anti-Semitism, Peck proved he was unafraid to align himself with challenging material. This willingness to stand firm, however, also made him less likely to back down when he clashed with others. By the time Peck became one of Hollywood's highest-paid and most admired actors, he had carefully crafted a public image, principled, refined, and unshakably professional. And for the most part, that image was accurate. Colleagues often described him as generous, polite, and deeply committed to his work. But those same colleagues also noted another side of Peck, a fiercely competitive streak and a low tolerance for arrogance or unprofessionalism. While he wasn't quick to anger once someone fell out of his favor, it was nearly impossible to win back his respect. This quality occasionally spilled over into his professional relationships. Hollywood in the mid-20th century was rife with egos, clashing personalities, and rivalries carefully hidden from public view by the powerful studio system. Actors were expected to maintain their images even when personal animosities simmered beneath the surface. Gregory Peck was no exception. While he maintained cordial relationships with most of his co-stars, there was one actor in particular with whom his relationship was anything but friendly. What made the situation more surprising was Peck's reputation as a gentleman. For someone so universally admired, the idea that he could vehemently hate another actor seemed unthinkable, and yet those close to Peck knew that his integrity came with a cost. He had little patience for people he considered dishonest, self-serving, or disrespectful. When he encountered such behavior, he didn't just dislike it, he actively resented it. Over the years, small whispers emerged from within Hollywood circles, hinting at a feud that never quite faded. Industry insiders noted that while Peck was adept at keeping his personal feelings private, there were moments when his disapproval slipped into the open, moments where his gentlemanly mask cracked just enough for people to see the intensity underneath. As the decades passed, the story of Gregory Peck's feud with this particular actor became the subject of speculation. Was it jealousy? A clash of styles? A personal betrayal? No one knew the full truth at first, but what was clear was that Peck's dislike was no passing irritation. He carried it with him, and it shaped the way he interacted with this rival throughout his career. And so, behind the noble roles, the moral speeches, and the composed interviews, Gregory Peck harbored a hatred that very few people outside of Hollywood understood. For fans, learning about this hidden side of him is both shocking and revealing. It shows that even the most dignified stars had their limits, that even Gregory Peck, the man who embodied Atticus Finch, could hold on to grudges when pushed too far. This chapter of his life reminds us that Hollywood's golden age wasn't just about glamour and grace. It was also about fierce rivalries simmering behind the scenes. And as we peel back the layers of Peck's life, we discover the one actor he truly couldn't stand and why their feud lasted for decades. The Hollywood studio system was built on the idea of pairing great talents together, often forcing actors into situations where they had no choice but to work alongside those they might never have chosen as friends. Gregory Peck, who valued professionalism and respect, rarely let his personal feelings interfere with his work. But that changed when he was paired with a co-star whose behavior struck him as arrogant, dismissive, and deeply unprofessional. This was the spark that ignited one of the most bitter rivalries of his career. The trouble began in the late 1950s, when Peck was already an established star with multiple box office hits and critical acclaim under his belt. Hollywood insiders say that Peck was initially cordial when introduced to this actor. After all, he prided himself on treating colleagues fairly. But it didn't take long before he sensed trouble. The rival, younger and far more brash, seemed determined to undermine Peck at every opportunity. Where Peck was measured and thoughtful, this actor was flamboyant and boastful. He was the type to steal scenes both on and off the screen, craving the spotlight in a way Peck found distasteful. On set, the differences between them became impossible to ignore. Peck was known for his meticulous preparation, often arriving early, studying his lines, and collaborating closely with directors. His co-star, by contrast, had a reputation for improvising, for bending the rules, and for expecting others to adjust around him. To Peck, this wasn't creativity. It was chaos. He saw it as disrespectful, not only to the director but to the entire cast and crew who depended on discipline to make a production succeed. The clash wasn't just about style, though. It was also about ego. Hollywood thrives on power dynamics, and Peck's rivals seemed to resent his authority and gravitas. Behind the scenes, whispers circulated about the younger star mocking Peck's serious approach, calling him too stiff and old-fashioned. Such comments, though perhaps intended as playful, cut deeply. Peck, who prided himself on his integrity and professionalism, felt openly disrespected. Worse, he felt his rival was trying to chip away at the very qualities that defined his career. Tensions reached a boiling point during one particularly grueling production. Multiple crew members later recalled how the atmosphere on set grew toxic whenever the two actors were in the same room. Scenes that should have been straightforward dragged on for hours as each man resisted giving ground. The younger actor seemed intent on upstaging Peck, deliberately stretching his lines or altering his delivery to draw focus. Peck, usually calm and composed, reportedly lost his temper more than once, a rarity that shocked those who knew him. But the feud wasn't contained to the film set. Off-screen, the two men's interactions were equally strained. Hollywood parties and industry events often brought them into the same orbit, and while Peck maintained his gentlemanly facade, insiders noticed the icy distance between them. Peck could be polite, but he was never warm. His rival, meanwhile, seemed to delight in provoking him, dropping sly remarks to journalists or making jokes at Peck's expense. For a man who valued dignity above all, these public slights were intolerable. Fans, of course, were oblivious to the animosity bubbling beneath the surface. The studio publicity machines carefully polished over any hint of discord, presenting Peck and his co-star as consummate professionals. Movie posters showed them standing side by side, smiling for the cameras, as though everything was perfect. but those who worked closest to them knew better. The rivalry had become a cold war, never officially acknowledged but impossible to deny. What made matters worse was that their feud wasn't just personal, it also carried professional consequences. Hollywood in that era was small, and reputations mattered. Peck's disdain for his co-star began influencing casting decisions, with him privately refusing projects that would put them together again. At the same time, the younger actor's career seemed to thrive on controversy, and his clashes with Peck only added to his reputation as a rebel. For Gregory Peck, the situation was more than a nuisance. It felt like a betrayal of what Hollywood was supposed to be, a place where hard work, respect, and integrity mattered. Instead, here was a rival who thrived on disruption, who seemed to sneer at everything Peck represented. The animosity between them deepened year after year, with neither man willing to extend an olive branch. Thus, the rivalry that began with a simple clash of personalities grew into a decades-long grudge. And as both men's careers unfolded, the bitterness only seemed to intensify. For Peck, it wasn't just about one actor, it was about the principle of respect. And once that principle was violated, his feelings hardened into something far stronger than simple dislike. By the early 1960s, what had started as a clash of personalities between Gregory Peck and his unnamed rival was no longer just a private irritation. It had become an open secret within Hollywood's inner circle. About the tension, crew members swapped stories, and columnists began dropping subtle hints. For an industry built on appearances, it was dangerous ground. Both actors had powerful reputations, but while Peck carried himself with quiet dignity, his co-star seemed to revel in stirring the pot. The first real crack in the polished studio facade came during an interview in which the younger actor was asked about working alongside Peck. Instead of offering the usual polite, diplomatic response, he gave a sly smirk and called Peck a statue with dialogue. The remark, though delivered with a laugh, carried the sting of mockery. To the press, it was just a cheeky soundbite. But to Peck, it was a public insult that questioned not only his craft, but the very seriousness with which he approached his work. For Peck, respect was everything. He had built his career on playing characters with gravitas, men whose words carried weight. To be reduced to a statue was to have his life's work dismissed in a single quip. And though he never retaliated publicly, his sense of decorum wouldn't allow it, those closest to him noticed a new sharpness in his tone whenever his rival's name was mentioned. The animosity deepened when the two found themselves in competition for similar roles. At least twice, they were rumored to have been considered for the same projects. One particularly high-profile film went to Peck's rival, and insiders claimed that the decision was influenced by studio executives who thought the younger actor brought modern energy that Peck lacked. To Gregory, it felt like another, calculated slight, proof that his rival wasn't just disrespectful, but actively working to outshine him. Behind closed doors, studio bosses worried about the escalating tension. In those days, the studio system thrived on carefully curated publicity. Rivalries could be useful when controlled. They generated headlines and kept stars in the spotlight. But open hostility risked alienating audiences. Executives allegedly began keeping the two men apart, quietly shelving projects that might have brought them back together on screen. Still, rumors trickled out. Crew members recalled tense silences on set, moments when even the air seemed thick with unspoken hostility. Others spoke of Peck's rival deliberately arriving late to scenes, forcing the perfectionist Peck to wait and stew. To outsiders, these might seem like petty grievances, but in the high-pressure environment of Hollywood, where time is money and egos are fragile, such provocations were enough to fuel lasting grudges. The feud also began spilling into social circles. Hollywood parties, charity events, and even awards shows became awkward arenas where both men were sometimes present. Peck would maintain his composure, offering polite nods but never warmth. His rival, however, seemed to delight in the discomfort, often making backhanded compliments or jokes that walked the fine line between playful banter and outright disrespect. For Peck, who valued sincerity, this kind of behavior felt toxic. Interestingly, fans remained largely unaware. To the public eye, Gregory Peck was the picture of grace, and his rival was the charming rebel. The press, though aware of the tension, rarely pressed too hard, perhaps out of fear of losing access to two of Hollywood's most bankable stars. As a result, what could have been one of Hollywood's most talked-about feuds remained mostly hidden, known only to insiders and whispered about in hushed tones. But inside Gregory Peck, the resentment grew heavier. He was a man who rarely allowed anger to dictate his actions, yet in this case, he felt he had been pushed into a corner. To him, it wasn't simply a matter of personal dislike. It was about principle, about the erosion of respect in an industry. That demanded it. And once Peck's trust was broken, reconciliation seemed almost impossible. As the years passed, Gregory Peck's career only solidified his place as one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Films like To Kill a Mockingbird immortalized him as the embodiment of integrity and quiet strength, a man audiences could both admire and trust. His rival, on the other hand, built his reputation on controversy, bold performances, and an unpredictable streak that kept him in headlines. The contrast between them couldn't have been sharper, and their animosity seemed to symbolize two very different visions of Hollywood. For Peck, the feud represented something far larger than a clash of personalities. He believed in the dignity of the craft, the idea that acting was more than stardom. It was about telling meaningful stories with honesty and discipline. His rival's approach, flamboyant and reckless, struck him as a betrayal of that ideal. It wasn't merely that he disliked the man, he disliked what the man stood for. Over time, this conviction hardened into a quiet but immovable resentment. Interestingly, despite the bitterness, Peck rarely allowed his feud to spill into public view. Friends later recalled how he would avoid mentioning the actor's name in interviews, choosing instead to redirect the conversation. When pressed privately, however, he would admit that he had little patience for men who disrespected the work of others. "Talent means nothing without discipline," he once remarked, a statement many interpreted as a veiled reference to his longtime rival. The rivalry had professional consequences as well. Hollywood casting directors became careful not to pit the two against each other in major roles, knowing that their presence on the same set could derail an entire production. This meant missed opportunities for collaboration, but it also cemented their rivalry as part of industry lore. Some insiders even suggested that the friction between them influenced the kinds of roles they were offered. Peck was often cast as the noble moral center, while his rival gravitated toward edgier, more rebellious characters. Whether intentional or not, their feud helped define their screen identities. By the 1970s and 1980s, the heat of the feud had cooled somewhat, not because of reconciliation, but because time had moved them into different phases of their careers. Peck transitioned into more selective roles and became a respected elder statesman of Hollywood, while his rival continued chasing provocative parts that fueled his reputation as a maverick. Yet whenever their names surfaced in the same conversation, the tension lingered, like a wound that had never fully healed. What's most striking, though, is how their feud shaped Gregory Peck's legacy. While his rival thrived on notoriety, Peck's refusal to sink into public mudslinging only reinforced his image as a man of dignity. Fans admired him not only for his performances, but for his restraint. He carried himself with the same calm authority off-screen that he displayed in films, and in doing so, he turned a bitter personal feud into proof of his character. In later interviews, as he reflected on his career, Peck remained careful not to speak with outright malice. However, one telling remark stood out. When asked about actors he found difficult to work with, he paused, smiled faintly, and said, "You learn who values the work and who values only themselves. He never named his rival, but the implication was clear. Even decades later, the resentment remained, tucked away behind his otherwise graceful demeanor. Ultimately, the feud between Gregory Peck and his rival became more than just a personal grudge. It was a clash between two philosophies of acting, two visions of Hollywood. One prized respect, discipline, and tradition, the other thrived on rebellion and ego. And though the two men never reconciled, their hostility revealed the fault lines within an industry forever torn between art and spectacle. To this day, fans of classic cinema still speculate about the true depth of Peck's hatred, wondering just how much of his frustration was rooted in wounded pride and how much in genuine principle. But one thing is certain. For Gregory Peck, this was no passing irritation. It was a lifelong reminder that even the most noble of men have their limits, and that in Hollywood, some wounds never truly heal.